You have the borders of the Middle East being redefined from how they were set after World War II, and it doesn't look like they'll ever go back to how they were. And you have to wonder if they'll ever see peace. What's going on there?
When the Middle East was stable, it was because Turkey dominated the region. When Turkey fell in World War I, the French and the British redrew the borders. The borders made no sense. They were useful for the French and the British, but they made no sense, particularly in the Arab world. For a very long time, the United States was prepared to guarantee the stability of the region so that oil would flow. Well, you've got a combination of things that are happening. The first is that the Arab masses have a very different vision. They're Islamic. The borders that were drawn made no sense. It went through tribal lines and ethnic lines. At least enough of them want to resurrect the caliphate to create a conflict. At the same time, the importance of the Middle East economically has declined. That means that there was declining willingness on the part of the United States to try to stabilize the situation. But it sort of evaporated when the price of oil, collapsed. So we're now in a situation where there has been a rising in the Arab world that can't be stopped without major force being introduced. Mm-hmm. And nobody's prepared to introduce that. The Russians don't have major force. They're caught in the same mess that the Americans were. The U.S. is not going to double down on its strategy. The Europeans are going to make speeches. They're not going to do anything. So you're in a situation where this entire region is destabilized. Nobody from the outside has an interest in restabilizing it. It's going to be stabilized by one of four powers, the regional powers: Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel. Israel is not going to be the restabilizing power in the region. Saudi Arabia has too many economic problems to even imagine it. The Iranians have their own internal problems, but are kind of hungry. It comes down to Turkey.
Can Turkey do it? Are they big enough, strong enough?
Well, they're the largest economy in the Islamic world, except for Indonesia's a tad over. It's a huge economy. Got one of the largest armies in Europe. But it's very cautious. It doesn't want to take these risks. Interestingly, it came out of the coup d'etat stronger than it ever was. Erdogan clearly runs the country. Any opposition to him has been cowed. Now he's beginning to probe into the region. He knows that the Middle East is a morass. It is the big muddy. You go in, you don't get out. And he hasn't wanted to. He's been happy to see the Americans carry the blade. But I think the Turks are going to have to move into the region. And this is where they start becoming a major power.
How do the Kurds factor into their plans?
I would not like to be a Kurd given Turkish plans for them. From the Turkish point of view, they are not going to allow the eastern portion of Turkey to become an independent state. They don't have to, they won't, it's not going to happen. The Kurds are divided among various regions, various factions. They're not nearly as united as people say. And ultimately, when it comes down to the survival of this region and the direction of it, it's not going to be the Kurds that are going to be the driving force. The United States has backed the Kurds. The Kurds have been useful to the United States. But at this point, it's just not clear what the U.S. policy is.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Syria a little bit. There doesn't seem to be any end in sight in that conflict either, and you have so many foreign actors. Can you tell me what needs to happen there to bring peace to that region?
One of the mistakes we make about thinking about tyrants is we think they have no support. Assad is an Alawite. It's a segment of Islam. The Alawites know that if they lose, they're going to be massacred by the Sunnis or some of the other segments. They'll fight to the death because they're going to die if they don't. They're fighting for their families. And this is one of the things that's really just not understood about Saddam Hussein, the Assads, Gaddafi, these are not people without support. So they're not going to go away. The opposition to him was dominated by the Syrians because they never could get their act together. They oppose each other. They have different views, different factions. And so, for the same reason that the Assads were able to govern since 1970, this group can't get together to overthrow them. The United States throwing its weight behind the opposition, well, it depends how much weight. Now you've also got ISIS. And if you overthrow Assad, maybe ISIS takes over Damascus. What started very simply in the myth of the Americans is the freedom-loving people of Syria finally rose up against the tyrant. The Arab Spring myth. Well, it was so much more complicated than that, you couldn't begin to figure it out. The Russians have gotten in to show that they could. They show the world, we have airplanes too, and we can get involved. And congratulations, now you're involved. Hope you enjoy it. The Americans are trying to find their way out. The French are operating off in the margins. There's enough there to keep it unstable for a very long time, and not enough there to pull it together. And this is really the case in different ways in Iraq. It's the case in Libya. It may become the case in other Arab countries, worst case Saudi Arabia. This is what this region is going to look like for a while.
So does this forecast or this assessment, this is pretty sober, does the U.S. have to get in more? Or are we better off getting out, which I think is what most Americans would probably prefer to do?
Well, if you're going to get into a conflict, you have to ask two questions. What do you want to achieve? And do you have the force to achieve it? We got into Iraq with 130,000 troops, 150,000 troops, in a country of 25 million. The probability of that force pacifying the Iraqi population was zero.
The math doesn't work.
As somebody once pointed out, the ratio of New York City policemen to population is way higher than the ratio of U.S. troops to Iraqis. The situation in Syria is even worse. So the problem here is, what do you want to achieve? Unclear. Do you have the force to achieve it? Well, it's hard to imagine what you're doing, but the answer is no. So there's no question the United States is not going to get involved in it. We got involved in Iraq because we had a fantasy that we would be welcomed as
the great liberators.
The great
right?
liberators. Well, we found out that they really don't want to be occupied by the Americans. So hopefully we got into Libya thinking that if we got rid of Gaddafi, it would look like Wisconsin. It didn't. At some point, the United States has to learn about the realities of power, which is you can be very powerful and still have limits to what you can do.
With oil prices where they are, and probably staying quite low for quite a long time, what does that mean for Saudi Arabia? You have a country with massive wealth. You have a very dependent society in Saudi Arabia on that oil wealth and that oil income. What happens to them?
I'll put it this way. This is a country that has been governed by a gerontocracy, and old people, where kings who are 85 are succeeded by kings who are 81. They now have a 30-year-old who has a great plan of reinventing Saudi Arabia. That means they're desperate. They're desperate in two ways. One, they think they have to reinvent Saudi Arabia. And two, they think a 30-year-old can do it. All right? And this is a huge problem for the Saudis. They're an oil exporting country. That's what they do. They have some other things they do, but not very well. And they don't really have massive investment capital right now.
You're saying the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund is not massive?
Oh, it's massive, but massive enough to transform a nation.
Certainly can't replace the cash flow from oil at $100 a barrel.
Here's the story. I mean, when you're having $100 a barrel, you don't need to do this. When you're not having $100 a barrel, you can't do this.
Right.
And this is the Saudi dilemma. But I think it's particularly striking they would reach out of the gerontocracy to a young, inexperienced man. to save the country.
So what's your forecast for the region as a whole?
The region will remain incredibly unstable. Over time, it'll be pacified by the Turks. It will not be a pretty picture how they do that. But you are seeing the first elements of the return of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire ruled southwestern Europe, southeastern Europe, the Black Sea region, North Africa, Middle East. It's not going to be because the Turks have a plan for conquest. It's chaos, and we've got to put an end to this, and we will go in reluctantly. But what will come out of this is a very powerful Turkey.
And a region that will be under Turkish rule? Or sort of a United States of the Middle East?
The Turks don't necessarily have the highest degree of respect for the Arabs. The Turks treating them as equals within a coalition is not likely to happen. Plus the fact that the Arabs are so deeply divided in a war with each other that won't solve the problem. The way to stop a war that can't be stopped by its own logic is impose a peace. That's what the British and French did in 1920. That's what the Turks are going to do.
Eye-opening discussion. Thank you, George.